Hi, and welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I am your host, Steve E.51. I'm an author and mental health counselor. Are you curious about therapy? Do you feel there is a lot of mystery about therapy? Do you wonder what your therapist is doing and why? The goal of this podcast is to make therapy and psychology accessible to all by using real language and straight-to-the-point discussions. This podcast wants to remind you to take care of your mental health, just like you would your physical health. Therapy should not be intimidating. It should be a great way to better health. I will demystify what happens in counseling, discuss topics related to mental health, and discussions you can have with your therapist. I also want to introduce psychology in everyday life, as I feel most of our lives are enmeshed in psychology. I want to introduce the subtle and not so subtle ways psychology plays a factor in our lives. It will be my own mix of thoughts as well as special guests. So join me on this discovery of therapy and psychology. Hi, and welcome to episode 51 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I am Steve E.51. If you haven't listened to episode 50, it's a review of the season. If you missed a few episodes because you're busy, and I get that, maybe you get a synopsis of the different episodes and you can go back and listen to them. So I hope you do so. But episode 51 is the most downloaded episode. And again, I think it was the same thing in season 3. It is Pat Rice. Pat Rice is an amazing guest on so many levels. He is candid. He is honest. He is someone I get along with that I've known for many years. So I hope you enjoy the interview. Pat Rice is someone that's going to come back, and I'm going to keep him on subject this time. And that's what I've been asked to do. So we're going to talk about his near-death experience. We are going to talk about his behavior when he was not sober. We are going to talk about recovery. We will talk about spirituality. We will talk about energy. We will talk about so many things, and I hope I can keep him on subject. All joking aside, Pat is an amazing guest, so interesting guy. So I hope you enjoyed the interview. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I am Steve E.51. This is episode 43. As I said, I'm sitting here with a returning guest, Pat Rice. Pat Rice was on episode 32. Pat Rice is someone I consider a friend. We have the same mentors from the past and just enjoyed my conversations with him for so long. The interview went so well on episode 32. We didn't even get to half the stuff we want to talk about, which is typical of me and Pat, getting off subject and talking about 400 other things. Probably means that he's a very interesting guy. So I want to welcome back Pat Rice.
Thanks, Steve. It has nothing to do with ADD, of course, but yeah, it was really nice the first time, and you make it so easy. It's a conversation just as we've had many. I did get a little bit of feedback from folks. One of them is my wife, and suggested that I get back and talk about what I said I was going to talk about the last time, but we got it led astray, or afield, shall we say. It's always you go in the direction that the energy in the universe kind of moves you. So I'd probably get in a little bit more of that today.
Well, you stole the words out of my mouth, because I don't even know your wife, but I felt her energy saying you cannot let him stray from the near-death experience that he had. Yeah. So that's one of the things that we're definitely going to talk about today. But again, for those who did miss episode 32, can you just do a quick intro of who you are, Pat?
Sure. I'm an elder, if you will. I'm almost 74. I'll be 74 on St. Patrick's Day. And I'm a psychotherapist. I have been for most of my recovery. I'll talk a little bit about that at Steve's behest today, that I am a clean and sober guy for coming up on almost 36 years, early April rather. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today on near-death experience that I've had, and how those who have had similar have been led to me, and shamanism and all of that kind of world in which I live now, is as a result of that sober path and some of the people that have been influential in guiding me, and other entities as well. So it's all tied in. And as I said, the first podcast we did is that I have not really talked about this publicly. I kept it out of my clinical practice for a long time until, again, my guides were telling me it needed to come out, because people were coming to me for some guidance in their own spiritual journey and not necessarily for traditional psychotherapy. So my practice has shifted over time, and as all of ours does, we make ourselves available, and the universe sends us our folks, our patients, our clients. As we talked about yesterday when we just chatted a bit, is that the greatest teachers I've ever had are the people that have been sent to me to help. And they've led me to a lot of the people that have helped me because I was just curious. And if
Right.
there's one thing about Steve and I that we resonate with is we're both exceedingly curious people.
Yes, we definitely are.
Yeah.
I think that's why we end up like getting off subject on a regular basis.
Oh, yeah.
I think about our supervision group.
Yeah.
Sometimes we end up talking about stuff like, oh, what were we
Yep,
consulting about?
Yeah, it's all support in best sense of it. But I am a free and kindred soul here today. You're the one that has to keep me on track. Best of luck, my friend.
Well, like I said, I'm very interested about guides, and we're going to
Mm-hmm.
definitely get back to that because that's another thing that I got to tell you, I'm curious about it. I know a little bit about it, but I can't tell you that I'm very familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
And for the record, when you talk about how your life, for me, therapists come to me sometimes and ask me for advice. I ran a group to how to start
Mm-hmm.
a private practice at one point. They asked me, how did you decide to do what you do? I said, I really didn't decide anything. I'm a child and family specialist. I see no children and I see no families.
Mm-hmm.
I never became someone who does a lot of sobriety and a lot of trauma. Just with time, that's where it was guided for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely, sometimes going with the flow is so important. But right now, I am not moving with the flow. I would go down a few different rivers here.
Mm-hmm.
Let's stay on one river right now. And the river that we're going to stay on, Pat, is your near death experience.
Okay.
While we've been talking about it here, and it seems like we were talking about it, and I never want to feel like I trivialized it in any way, shape, or form. So I know this is a serious subject, and I really want to keep you on track because I think not only is your guide saying that, I literally feel like your wife has told me that, and I've never met her.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not letting you deviate. I'm going to keep it to the point as much as I can on that. So how about you share a little bit about your near-death experience, or NDE, as you
Mm-hmm.
taught me a couple of months ago?
Okay. I'll just start with the recovery because it's tied into it, obviously. I had it was a long ride, but it was a short time in it, time-wise, about 12 years total of alcohol and drug use, a lot of it, child of the 60s. As we used to glibly say, if you remember the 60s, you weren't there, which was rationalization or euphemism for the fact that we spent a lot of it experimenting in search of the path that I'm on now. And I'll explain that a little bit. But I got clean when I was, and sober when I was 27, I think, 28. And the first time, and went into a treatment program that really, it was less sophisticated than they are today, but I stayed on a clean and sober path for about 5 years, got away from all supports, basically became a marathon runner, which is, I've said before, is the Forrest Gump plan of spiritual advancement. Just keep running. And then the day comes when your body won't allow you to do that anymore. And now you have to deal with grief and all of the stuff that was chasing you. It's like the wake of a boat that finally catches up, run out of gas. So I started using again, and it didn't take very long for me to get very, very, very ill, psychiatrically and spiritually. And that culminated in me waking up one morning in April, on April 8th, I believe, of 1986, with someone with an axe, a firefighter, breaking the door down in my apartment. Yeah, a couple of people with them, a roommate and someone else that I knew. Actually, my drug dealer, but he was a friend of mine.
Right.
And I'm all shocked. And what are you doing? It's like 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. And my roommate is saying, you're supposed to be at work. I said, it's Monday. I have today off. He said, Pat, it's Tuesday. What it boils down to is that I had been overdosed for 2 days and came back to life in this form. The vehicle that transports the spirit around came back to life because the spirit had left for a while and went to another place, and which I will talk about. Now, a reason I bring that whole scenario up is that obviously was a fairly dramatic intervention and got me that day into a treatment facility that was, I thought it was a detox. It was a very sophisticated psychiatric hospital. which had a detox in it, but I ended up on the psych unit because I was so dysregulated and so detached from reality. And for a lot of reasons, now I know a lot of it had to do with the fact that I had been someplace else and come back, been home, as I refer to it, then back. And it was a very disorienting experience, as it often is described. So after a number of days in that facility, just basically drugged. They give you a lot of heavy meds, as detoxes and psych units look pretty much the same. Everyone is heavily medicated, wandering around, bumping into things until the medicine starts to withdraw, and then you start to see baseline. Well, I was sitting in a group. What happened is after about 5 or 6 days, I think, in that I was pretty drugged, and they were starting to withdraw the meds. And the guy was sitting in front of me who was like me, a guy like me today, and said, Pat, they say here, I get your chart, and they say that you're crazy. He said, I think you're addicted. And if you give me, like me, he said, and if you give me 3 weeks of your life, we'll know for sure what is your problem right now, what's going on. And if I'm wrong, then you can go back up here and do the Thorazine shuffle with the rest of these folks. But I think you're a drunk and an addict like me. And there was something about him. He's dead now. Maybe I mentioned the last time. I can't remember. His name was, oh my gosh, I forgot. Mike. Anyway, it'll come to me. He lived in Maine, southern Maine. He had been involved in crime and things like that. And he was now a social worker working in a document. Mike Darcy. He's dead now. He died of cancer a few years ago. Amazing human being. But he was right. And I came back to Earth. And one of the first therapy groups. Now, every day they had a big therapy group, and everyone would be sitting there. There'd be 3 or 4 counselors in there. The whole community, the recovery community was there. And I was just sitting there trying to orient myself, to where I am. It was very, very disorienting. And a 17-year-old boy who was sitting next to me, boy, I say, at that point, I'm 38 years old. I just turned 38. Started talking about, his experience, and he had and why he started using drugs. And he had died on an operating table or something and had this experience. And he talked about a near-death experience. And out of nowhere, I suddenly became entranced with him. And everything he said, I knew what he was going to say. I had been so heavily sedated in my overdose that I literally didn't recall much of it when I came back into this adult body. And I knew everything. And so, of course, I had to talk to this kid. I think I scared the crap out of him. Forgive me, that's a clinical term. But he took one look at me, wild-eyed, and said, "I got to get away from this guy," because I was just obsessed with it. And so I went into the library that they had. I don't recall internet in 1986, but I don't think they did have internet then. But I went to the library that they had there, which actually was what clinicians would use as well. And I started to research this. And when I got out, because I knew everything he was going to say, just like it had happened to me. Duh. And I started to read everything. And in those days, everything started with Ray Moody.
Yes.
Who was the pioneer he's a physician, a psychiatrist. I think he was a psychiatrist. And he wrote many, many books on near-death experiences, and many others have. I bet I have read 50 books on near-death experiences and a bunch of other things. And because I just couldn't get enough. And in the beginning, it was validating my experience, because remember, I was coming out of a drug haze and an overdose state where neurons were coming back slowly. And I was psychiatric for the better part of a year. If it wasn't for the family halfway house and my mother and brother who said that we'll never leave him alone, they would have put me away for a long time in a locked unit, because I was that lethal. I was just that unpredictable. So, and it's where my recovery skills began, mostly in 12-step recovery, and which continues to this day, because I learned I didn't want to go back that path. So the near-death experience that he described it's a fairly classic one, and I would encourage anybody who has any curiosity about this day today, not that this talk is not that you've had one of these things, but many, many people have. And I'll get into that a little bit.
And I just want to interrupt you for a
Sure.
second, Pat, and say a couple of things. Yes, he is a psychiatrist. Love having Google right available while I'm talking to you. number two, the Thorazine shuffle is an old term for us, where people who have a psychiatric issue and it had a tardive dyskinesia effect to people. So they would shuffle their feet while they were walking. So that's what that was. Wanted to mention those two things because I think that you mentioned that. And the near death experience, we're not going to move from that, but for the record, I do think that you've been very clear about your addiction, and I appreciate that. I also think you crazy, but in a good way, because most good therapists are slightly crazy in my opinion. So wanted to throw in a couple of things on that comment. Listening to Finding Your Way Through Therapy, I'm Steve Beeson, sitting with Pat Rice, talking about his near death experience. Had to interrupt him a little bit here, but I want to get to exactly what you were going to go to, because I was like, oh, he talked about something. Oh, I heard this guy, knew what he was going to say. There's research recently that came out. It's not been replicated just yet. Came out in January about how our brains, when we get close to death, it goes to a certain part where our memories are kicked in. And that's why sometimes people do see their history. So there are some neurological advances that are making us understand more about why people see their lives right before they die. But we're not here to talk about research. We're here to talk about Pat Rice. So let's hear your story about you predicting and knowing what the guy was going to say next.
Oh, well, I'll just speak to the research. I talked to a neuroscientist researcher not so long ago, last year, and asked her, I said, I was always told to learn that we know maybe 15% about how the actual central nervous system and brain works. And she said, yeah, that's maximum, she said, because it is the most complicated thing in the universe physically, as far as we know. So when I hear research and everything and the reductionist view of Western medicine wanting to definitively say, well, it's clearly just a gasp of oxygen. And if they had been where I've been, and as I said before, if anyone is really curious about listening to a eminent physician talk about his near-death experience, Google Eben Alexander and read his 2 books. And gosh, Steve can find that thing. I can't remember them, but I actually heard him speak in Sudbury.
Was that the guy at the synagogue?
Yes.
Across from the mosque in Hudson, Massachusetts?
Yes. And there was many other people that I knew from the professional psych community were there as well, including one of the best psychiatrists I've ever known, Chris Gordon, so from Advocates. But anyway, it's back to my experience. So everyone's going to have their own understanding of things. There has been an underground movement of people that Ray Moody started to bring that out, kind of like the gurus that say, well, we're going to continue whispering these messages. We're just going to use microphones. He began to legitimize this, and I'll explain some of the things that I have seen and experienced. The classic experience is a tunnel experience, a very noisy, loud, bright tunnel that kind of looks like the versions of a wormhole, going down a wormhole. Frankly, it almost reminds me in the movie 2001, A Space Odyssey, when he is off going into another dimension or wherever the heck he was going. That's the kind of experience it is. It's loud. Dr. Alexander described that remarkably well. It's a loud, disjarring experience. You're literally it's mostly has to do with the frequency. In order to operate in a very low band frequency in this plane of existence, the spirit, which vibrates at a much, 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 much higher frequency in the other dimension from which we came, it is a very awkward transition. So it's loaded with, for lack of a better term, static, and it's an awkward and loud and disjarring experience. And then you're in a very beautiful, quiet, peaceful place that is pretty unique to the individual. It seems that you experience things that are unique to your life experience and your past life experience, your whole experience, if I should say. And there's an opportunity to reflect in a meaningful way with your guides as to did you fulfill your mission in this incarnation? And I'll get a little bit astray is that what I did learn, I might have said it the last time, is about my last life experience is the only thing the guides would say to me was that you need to know nothing more than the fact that you did not survive your addictions in that lifetime, my last life. That's the only thing that's relevant to you. The rest of it is probably just a garden variety sad existence or whatever, missed opportunity. So my full experience, my own near-death experience, came mostly when I started reading about others. And then it just all came back to me. It's a flooding type of experience. It started with that 17-year-old. It couldn't continue because he thought he was looking at Rasputin, the mad monk or something, who was chasing him around for a while. And then a nurse said, "You got to leave him alone, Pat. You're all psychiatric here, remember?" So she said, she was the one actually that sent me to the library. She said, "Go look it up." There wasn't much then, and they didn't have an internet search, so it was old school, and it was books. And I literally, as the books were being written, I was reading them the minute they came out and devouring them. And I'll fast forward from that. You're just on the other side, and it's the place from which we all come. There's just a Now, I'm saying this through a consciousness that is fourth dimensional consciousness, not fifth dimensional. It is of this world. So what I remember, and it's hard for me to remember exactly what I know and what I've read about others and heard many others speak to. But there's a commonality, is that there is no fear. There is peace. Is there euphoria, like we would think about that type of joy? What I remember more than anything is what would probably best be described in an ineffable, indescribable experience of love and well-being, and just in the right place. That everything that bothers us intellectually and all the ways that it can bother us physically in this plane of existence is not there. And communication is in a very simple, telepathic kind of understanding way. And it's just especially after coming through a death, leaving a body and all of that, that discharging experience, it's just so peaceful, and you feel so loved. That is the experience, love. If you're looking for one word to describe dark energy or chi or whatever runs the universe, that energy would be love. For any lack of anything else, it fuels everything. So then it's decided on that side, and I don't remember exactly the nature of it, but I knew that it was time to come back, and that it was time to come back to this experience because my work wasn't done. You transition back, and people say, "Well, what's different now?" Well, the single biggest difference for up to the point of that time in my existence, as in this lifetime, I had a terrible fear, and I understand now it was a fear of I had missed the boat. I had not fulfilled myself. I had wasted an education. I was just a bartender, and at the end, the bartender who couldn't stay sober on a day shift. I had clients driving me home at 5:00. People in the bar driving me home because I couldn't. So that's a fairly pedestrian existence. And, I knew now that it was time to get to work, that I had things to do, but I was so addled mentally that I just had to heal. And that became a path where the one thing that helped me to heal was to read more and more and more about these experiences and let my body heal and come back. And so in that process, I spent, thousands of hours walking. And that's my first experience of having a sense of guides in a primitive way. And then as I get into my practice, grad school and practice, and people were put in my path. Now, I should say this. I want to just explain this one thing, which started to open my mind to. I'm going to describe an angelic experience. When I got sober, I was come back from a horrible week where I tried to kill myself twice in South Carolina on a golf trip. I don't think I talked about this. Did I, Steve, from the last time?
I was going to say that you did not talk about that. Good. And that's kind of like very important to
it is.
Continue the story of Pat Rice. But
I came back and with a number of guys I used to go to play golf with every year. And I was having panic attacks, and I was eating 4 or 5 different drugs, sedatives, uppers, and copious amounts of alcohol. And I was a bloody mess. I tried to kill myself twice, and they weren't aware of it, but they just knew I was just a mess. I drove drunk down there. I remember driving on a sidewalk at 2 a.m. in Myrtle Beach, and I didn't get caught. But I remember just enough so that it'll never leave me. Should it ever occur to me that maybe flammable liquids would be a good thing to consume today, not happening. So
Right.
I'm standing at Logan Airport. My disgusted friends left me with all the baggage on the curb while they went to get a car, that was parked someplace. And they were disgusted. They wouldn't speak to me. And I'm thinking about I was going back to Maine, and I was miserable. And I'm picking buses out because the shuttle buses for the rental cars and stuff was zipping by. And I remember one, I was waiting for one that only had a driver because I didn't want to horrify people as I stepped out in front of it. I just wanted to, apologize to one person that was going to ruin his night, and I was going to end it. As I was just about to lean off that curb toward the Avis bus, the yellow Avis bus, as I recall, I heard a voice behind me that said, Pat Rice? This is emotional. I turned around, and a dear friend of mine who had been an innocent girlfriend of mine in high school, and we'd maintained a friendship in college, Donna, was there. I hadn't seen her since her wedding 20 years ago or something, or 18 years ago. And she told me afterwards, I turned around, and she thought I was going to break her ribs because I hugged her so hard. And we connected quickly. They were in a shuttle. Her parents, they were coming back. She was divorced now, and the kids were coming back. And we agreed to phone and talk. And it turns out that not only at that moment did she save me, but she was in dire straits too. We reconnected. She helped me to encourage me to get into the hospital. And then I think I overdosed because, well, I got all the stuff. I might as well, the classic addict alcoholic. I got all the stuff. I might as well just use it, and then I'll get whatever. I'll deal with it.
The last hurrah.
Yeah, the last hurrah. When I worked in the detox and see people get out of a cab, guzzle the last pint and throw it in the dumpster and walk in, got to get the last drop in, or you have to finally stop. So but she was instrumental in the first, in my early time here. When we reconnected in the best possible way, I was able to, as people told me later, that I validated her. She'd been really depreciated in a very controlled marriage to someone who was very powerful and had marginalized her. And so we helped each other in a way, but she was very ethereal. And she was a person who later was said to be, by a former teacher of ours, totally without guile. I say that because I'm 10 months sober, and she died of pneumonia at age 37. And she got that Jim Henson version of pneumonia, and walked pneumonia, and she wanted to do Christmas for her kids. And the day after Christmas, she went in the hospital and died on January 14th or 15th in 1987. And that was the day I was on my own, and I finally had a choice to make. Which path are you going to take? And of course, I went to my AA meeting, and for the first time told everybody about her, because you weren't supposed to tell people about relationships or whatever. And that's when I understood the power of that support group, where the unique thing about these types of support groups is that if people are in pain, people in the room move toward the pain. They don't move away from it. I can remember having a panic attack in Roach Brothers, and someone came up to me that was like a neighbor and said, "How you doing?" And I started to tell them, and they said, "Geez, I just came in. I got to go, but geez, you ought to talk to someone about that." A good thought. So
nothing like a good supermarket panic attack.
Nothing like that. You leave the thing, and you're out there, and you're doing deep breathing exercises against your car. That was the early going for me. So I was on my own now, but I'd watched her die. She took basically her last consciousness. I was standing with her, making her laugh, actually. They were going to do a biopsy, and they were giving her morphine. And I said, geez, you get all the good stuff. I could use some of that right now. And she just, she was intubated, so her eyes were laughing. And then she never regained consciousness in the ICU. Years later, the first ICU evaluation that I did in that hospital was in the room that she died in. It just doesn't. And one of the last things she said to me, and then I'll end it with my friend Donna, my angel. She said that every single thing that you've had experienced to you, every pain, every difficulty is going to give you great leverage to help another one day, which is the spirit of selfless service and helping others. And if there is one tenet of how to stay focused on balance in a kind of a recovery movement or 12-step movement is help somebody else. It started with two people who were hopeless cases, and the physician said, "Why don't you guys talk to each other? We got nothing for you. Maybe you can help each other." And now, there's 3,000 meetings in Eastern Massachusetts in a week. That is the spirit of it, and it started with her. But I then now had to find another avenue, and it started innocuously enough is that I was taking over my mentor. I've talked about him, Dick, in the last one, the chaplain in the hospital in which I worked, who was a recovery mentor and also a life mentor. And he trained chaplains, and he trained me as a chaplain, if you will. And I used to get more when I walk into a room, people thought I was a priest. No collar or anything, but because of the aura that, following around a real healer like that as a being, you kind of pick up on their energy. But I took over his group. He went in to have a hip replaced, and I took over his group. And in the group sitting next to me was a young woman. And this has been the path, is that once I became open to studying and acknowledging my own near-death experience, I can't tell you how many hundreds of people have found me, working in a hospital, and doing consults all the time, being the first person they talk to after intubation when they're extubated, in an ICU, after 10 days on an Ativan drip to save their life. They've had a lot of experiences that often the medical teams don't talk about. Some of them do. It's a hard thing to do that. I remember Brian Weiss, another psychiatrist who spoke about helping people get in touch with these past experiences, said in his preface to the first book he wrote, he said, "I'm probably going to ruin my career." That's what my colleagues told me, because he was a Yale-educated psychiatrist and an eminent scholar or whatever. But so sometimes they take a chance. And many of the books about near-death experiences, much like Dr. Moody's, have been written by physicians, a lot of ER physicians.
And Pat, I'm going to interrupt again. I'm trying to give you all the space.
Okay.
And again, remind everyone, finding your way through therapy, Steve Biso. I'm pretty much wanting to hear Pat's story. And there's about 40 questions that came to mind while you were talking. But I'm going to start with one that to me is so meaningful in my life, because when you talk about, for me, it's not about guides, but there are people in my life that have since passed. And I feel that their guidance and their presence has been around me since then. I think about a good friend of mine who died. I talk about it in my book, 80, who died when I was 12 years old. Have my family members like my grandmother, and certainly a good friend of mine, Christina, who passed away. I can't believe it's like 13 years ago. But at the end of the day, what I feel is that sometimes they come back in my life in weird ways, and not in a bad way. Like they show up when I need them to guide me. You were talking about your ex-girlfriend who unfortunately died of pneumonia. It really sounded like she had such a spiritual connection to you. Has she manifested herself in your life since then?
That is a very good question. And of all of the people I have known in my life and have been related to, and some I never met, she has not come through.
Interesting.
And I have a sense that she and I have been together in many lifetimes, and is the kind of the soul pod that they talk about, kind of like a repertory theater where you have different roles depending upon the production, that type of a theater group. But no, I've never had a connection with her. I've had, parents have come in a lot, other relatives that I knew, some that I didn't, other beings that are familiar to me, but I don't know from where. But Donna has never come back in. I expect that sometime we will reconnect. That's the nature of kind of soul mates, soul connections like that, is that you meet someone, and it happened to me not so long ago in a clinical setting where I just knew I knew this person, and there was no way I knew her or whatever the gender is. There's no gender on the other side, so but no, she has never. I think her job was to upload, and that's what the guides do, and your assistants, your ascended masters or whatever, is that they periodically upload you with information. When my mother was about to pass, my dad, who died many years earlier, came to me and said, you're going to be very disoriented for a while, for a few days, because your mother has a lot to give you. She's going to give you a lot. And that's what they do, is they just kind of upload you in the vernacular today. It's all of these people. Some have come in, and I've only seen them one time. This young woman, and I took over Dick's group that time, and there was a woman sitting next to me who had died 11 times during heart surgery. She was 22 years old.
You talked about her in the episode.
And so,
the pen story.
The pen above the thing. And I've heard that same story, similar stories, over and over and over again.
And I'm going to leave it as a cliffhanger so people can go back and listen to episode 32, because I want people to go back, because that was such a powerful story too.
You clever podmaster, you. Yeah.
Hey, I get one or two right once in a while.
But these folks have just found me over and over and over again. And most of it is just to be validated. I don't know why I chose you, but it's, and I know why. When someone starts, I know where they're going. So I kind of shortstop it now. And that when someone is there and they're hinting around, and I said, I'll just basically kind of throw it out there in a way, is that, people come to me for all different, sometimes I do a lot of grief work. But I said, it sounds to me like it's something else you really want to talk about. Trust me, you cannot tell me anything I haven't heard before in some way, shape, manner. And because I really believe that. And then they start talking, and I said, oh, so you had one of those experiences? He said, yeah. And then they say so many of the same things over and over and over again. And the one thing about, from a validity standpoint, is that most of them that come for this validation have never read a thing about it. They don't even know there's a term. And some have. In this day and age, it's pretty hard not to, but they just needed to be validated. And the medical community is changing somewhat, and they're validating it more and more. So what this led me to, this near-death experience, and being oriented to that, is being open to being able to seek communication with my guides, my counsel, whatever the term is, the spirit guides. And that has led me to a path of more of a shamanistic path, which is a very misunderstood concept to many people. So let me give you my definition, my personal definition of.
Before we jump to that, so that I don't lose track. So spiritual guides is something that, again, very curious about. I have a vague idea of what you mean, but maybe for me and for the rest of the audience, what is a spiritual guide? Where does that come from?
A spirit guide is somebody that has an interest in helping me. Probably someone that I've known often for a long time, many, many lifetimes or forever. It's hard to put this in four-dimensional reality, but it's a four-dimensional language. But it is someone who's on my team, my support team, if you will. It's like anybody, any athlete, a high athlete has a whole team of people that help them. Starts with family, schlepping them all over the place to soccer games or whatever. So we don't do any of this alone. There's a community in all of this. And we come into this Earth School basically to take classes. And the professor that in the Earth School is pain. There's no pain on the other side. And so we come in here to get all of those forms of it. So these guides are present. And the goal of spiritual development, certainly even in a 12-step model, is to develop a conscious contact with this other power, this higher power, whatever it is. I don't look for, as I've said before, a deity or whatever. It's not religious. It's just I want to find out. I need help so I maximize my experience in this lifetime. And the guides, some people will call them guardian angels. Some people will call them archangels, the big guns, if you will. But they're all able to help us, but we must ask for it literally on a daily basis, because they will never interfere in our path. That is not their role. Their role is to help, and they have unlimited power to help. But we have to ask, and we have to find a path to that. And mine found me in a way, and I connected with a lot of people who facilitated this.
Right.
guides in this life, and I have one who's now in Utah. But it's
So guides don't have to be just only on the fourth and fifth dimension. They can be in three-dimensional right in front of you.
well, I think that anyone would tell you that if the higher power works through other people, and certainly the model of 12-step recovery is that if you put another person whose lifestyle and way of doing their business you respect, if you put them between you and your next action, especially if you're upset, you're probably going to live a more balanced life, and that's just seeking advice. And the Buddha once said famously that when the learner is ready, the teacher will appear. Whether it's a written word teacher or a person comes into your life, at a time when I was about literally to walk off and die because I was done. I just couldn't do the path of the sickness anymore. A person I hadn't seen in 20 years that had been very spiritually connected to me. They used to call us the dreamers in our group of people growing up in about the 8th grade. The dreamers, they're off talking about intellectual. And when everyone else was going to concerts, we were going to the Esplanade and seeing the Pops or something like that, where the intellectuals, they call this too. We were just talking about stuff that kids in middle school and high school didn't want to talk about, things that were beyond all of this. And
we all have that. We all have those experiences.
We all have those.
I certainly remember
it's
going to high school. Yeah. I got to give a shout out to one of my best friends, Frank, and my friend Joss and a few more people in my high school. We had a notebook about this big, and we would philosophize about stuff that 14, 15, 16-year-olds do. So it's not exactly like brilliant to this day, but it was nice to have that connection to people who were able to have that philosophy thought process.
Yep.
And most people would look at us like, it was half in English, half in French, because I went to a French school. So it was interesting. Sometimes it was about girls, but most of the time it was like philosophy stuff that, like, today I still have a book somewhere and I read it and I go, wow, we were dreamers. So when you said dreamers, I'm like, oh, I connect to that very much.
Yeah, I think the first thing and I have a book, one of the things she gave me was Khalil Gibran.
Khalil Gibran, yes.
Yeah, and that was something we looked at and reviewed when everyone else was reading Catcher in the Rye, which we read, but it was just something more to it. So I don't doubt that we've been together many times and will again, or been together forever. But the other guides, some of them are people that I knew in this life that have passed. My dad was a large part of it. We never had a relationship really in the life because he died so young.
How old were you when your dad died?
I was 25. He tried to help me, He was the guy as we were walking along the last time I saw him alive. He said, you drink and smoke too much. And I said, not any more than you. And he goes, that's right. And he was dead in a month. And that's the day I stopped smoking. And it wasn't so long after that I quit drinking too for the first time. And so but there are many ascended masters and guides, some of which are probably are ancestors that I'm unaware of. But there's a sense that I knew immediately that what was true is that many people have did everything in their power to keep me alive long enough so that I could fulfill myself in my mission, which was basically to burn the karma of all of the mistakes I'd make, and by helping others and doing the things that I do now. The connection to spirit guides in a shamanistic way, there are all kinds of pagan type or earth-based methods of shamanism, but shamans are essentially healers.
Right.
They're helpers and healers. And I posted something on social media the other day that I had seen and just grabbed from Mr. Rogers, who said, I'll quote it, you saw it, when bad things would happen around, and his mother used to just say, look for the healers, look for the helpers.
Yeah, well, healers.
Look for the helpers. And, the selfless service is important. Just doing what you can in your local community. We can't do much about world stuff, but we can turn around and it is a way of channeling the energy of despair or fear, doubt, and insecurity, or anger and frustration and outrage, channel into doing something. I know my wife has roots, her ancestors, her parents were Ukrainian. So she's twisted right now about this. What's she doing now? She's doing Meals on Wheels, which is what she does.
Yeah.
volunteering, helping someone who is in front of you, just with kindness. Just be kind. And the helpers are generally the people whose energy, it's all energy. Everything is energy. If we're going to do another one of these, it'll be all about energy. That'll be in season 5.
Oh, you will be invited back,
Or,
because I still look at our list and I'm
okay.
like, oh my God, we didn't get to like 3 more things. So you will be invited back. But I want to mention one thing that, talking about the healers and the helpers, one of the things that I've learned through my spiritual journey, and I want to share this with you because I read that about look for the helpers. The one thing that we tend to forget about first responders, helpers like mental health or doctors or medical, most of them are just in the moment. And if you look at that spiritual practice in general, I will never tell my first responders that they're doing a spiritual practice, because I think that they will be kind of like, no, I don't do that. But when you think about the helpers and the healers that you're talking about, and we're recording this, it's March 1st. The war between Russia and Ukraine has started about 5 or 6 days ago. So there's a lot of like very much relatable stuff. I know this will be released sometime in April. But I always think about how people who are healers and helpers, they're not thinking about tomorrow. They're not talking about the past. They're thinking about what can I do now to help people. And I think that that's part of the spiritual process that a whole lot of people have gone through that maybe they don't even realize that they do.
I would certainly agree. It's kind of what I see is we've gotten away from. I was reading, we've got a new favorite show on TV. It's another incarnation of All Creatures Great and Small on PBS now, the modern version. And it really goes back to trying to do a period piece about it. And they were talking to the cast, and they were all quite enamored with getting out into the Yorkshire Dales with the people that live there. They're a large part of the cast, if you will, the locals. And because there's a kindness and an openness and a gentleness about these people. And I think I mentioned it the last time, is that, you cannot really care for the personality of your neighbor, but if they need help, you help them. That's how you survive. And the reason that there's been 100, I think, incarnations of 12-step recovery groups for everything and support groups and everything is that we hunger for community. We've lost it in the great diaspora of families splitting and going all over the place. Is that we've lost our sense of community and family, and we find it if you're on a spiritual or shamanistic path. I'm finding the community that I have been with for all time. Remember, time is the dimension that we created here.
Right.
Is that there is no time in spirit, and there's no fear in spirit, there's no pain in spirit. There's just learning and trying to be helpful. And some of the ascended beings that have really evolved on the other side have great ability, and they've learned how to help people in this plane of existence, and that's part of their mission, if you will. And some of them are very high. The hierarchy. Swedenborg talked about this in his philosophy and his religion, but there's a hierarchy on the other side that mostly just has to do with frequency. There's no competition. It's not, well, geez, I can hardly wait to get up, because as you get there's more responsibility, there's more ways to be helpful to others. But that is the overall reaching thing about the world, the realm of spirit. Call it a quantum field, a quantum dimension if you're a physicist, but it's the ability to be connected to a community of beings and entities, whatever they are, or whatever it is. I'll promise you, it just makes sense. When on the other side, everything makes sense. So I used to say when I was a boy, and I meant it, I said, I don't know, but when I'm in heaven, I got a lot of questions. I used to say that. And some of them have been answered now. But what happens when you have a near-death experience is one thing. You cease to fear death at all. As I watched Donna lose her consciousness and move basically into a stasis, that most of her was already on the other side, I lost all fear of dying, because it really became apparent to me that this is every one of us is going to go through this transition, and the vast majority of us have done it before, sometimes many, many, many times. That's something that the energy, the energy world, the world of energy healing and all of that can assist as well. But
I'm writing it down for season 5 because between energy,
season 5,
spirituality, and reincarnation, I think we're going to have a lot to talk
yeah,
about there too.
yeah, we'll go Buddha in the next one. So
yeah, that's my guy. But I was going to ask you about
yeah.
that fear of death because, again, just a reminder: fighting your way through therapy. Steve Beason here, talking to Pat Rice, getting close to the end here. That's why we definitely need to do another interview. But I would say to you that, you know, when you lose your godmother at age 13, you lose your best friend at age 12, and you lose your grandmother at age 8 and never known your grandfathers, my fear of death went away pretty quickly. It led to reckless behaviors for a while, and I will admit that freely. But today, I don't fear death. And I think that if it happens, I'm not hoping it happens tomorrow. I'm hoping I have many, many years in front of me. But it's something that another spiritual practice that I kind of remind people is that whether you believe in afterlife or not does not matter to me. And I think I talked about that in the last podcast, but I'm going to say it again. Are you doing the best you can while you're here? And you need to be able to live your spiritual life while you're here and realize that that's probably the most important thing you'll leave. People talk about legacy. People talk about, I've never compared myself to Pat Rice or Dennis Sweeney or Bob Cherney or Don Scott or Courtney Romanowski. I don't have time to compare myself or compete with anyone. I got to be Steve. And do you think that part of that shamanistic ritual is also kind of like just being okay with you and not comparing and not competing and knowing that at the end of the day, we all end up in the same dust?
Well, we end up in the same collective consciousness. We all go back to the place we came from, the familiar place. We recharge that battery. A lot of that gets drained here. The path to shamanistic awareness of the original shamans, a lot of the Aboriginal shamans use mind-altering agents, ayahuasca, peyote, these types of things to facilitate it. The African-based ones, a lot of them use endless dancing, fatigue and exhaustion and everything to create that. We use in these disciplines here meditation, to facilitate. It's a calmness, a quietness that the altered consciousness is not that you're tripping. What it is that you're losing an interest in all of the distraction around you, and you're focused within in your own consciousness, and that is a meditative path. I sought that initially with LSD and peyote and psilocybin and all of those types of things, and ecstasy and all of the other agents. And I have the Dane Bramage, as we say, to prove it. Now it's a very different, and everything is restorable in consciousness, and the guides are there only to help. And the fear of death is not a fear of leaving here. It's not a fear. I think there's a natural thing, being human, of fearing an awful, painful death. I've watched people and helped people die of all kinds of things. ALS is at the top of the list of a very awful, undignified way to leave. But
dementia.
I've seen people do amazing things in acceptance and very spiritual living in that moment and in those moments. But it's the ability to just relax into a knowing that there's so much more to this. And my fear wasn't a fear of dying. My fear was a fear from that last lifetime of not getting it right again. And so there was a sense of urgency. But when I come in here, and what the guides tell me now is that relax. You've got all of us at your back. You will fulfill yourself this time. Just keep moving forward. Stay focused. Believe in yourself. Believe that all of the resources are going to be given you to assist others. My Reiki practice is attached to seeing people's energy and finding words and metaphor to help them that make sense to them. That's how I try to channel that energy. But it's to stop fearing that you're going to run out of time. You have plenty of time. As long as you are keeping yourself focused as much as you can on two realities. The present moment is the only thing that is actually real. And there's plenty of help available. We don't have to figure this all out for ourselves.
No.
And that's one of the things that, especially men, is that we just want to get into a corner. Just give me, I'll figure this out. You can't, And I will say this, I might have said it the last time too, is that Einstein said, famously that, you can't solve a problem with the same mind that created it. We need people. We need people on the other side. We need others to fulfill ourselves and to grow. We need to help others. That's all part of this give and take, the karmic balance of everything. And we've lost a lot of it on planet Earth now, is that we're become, in many corners of the world, takers and not helpers. And as we say, there's a lot of people on planet Earth right now that they name streets after, and they all have an arrow. And we're taught, and my guides have taught me how to handle and move away from the energy vampires.
Right.
And that is something we'll talk about the next time. How about that, Steve?
Well, how about we put a bow on it by doing that? And I'm saying that for me, I agree with a lot of the stuff you talked about. Obviously, possessions. I got to say something about that, because I can't take this book to the other side. I can't take this pen to the other side. I can't. So, we talked in the last episode, and I think we're going to talk about the spirituality of how possessions are really like, they're not possessions, right? That jersey behind me is not coming with me.
You take two things with you, two things only: knowledge and love. Knowledge and love is what goes with you. That's what I learned. And the pain we see in people is when they get disconnected from a sense of love, or they get disconnected from their knowing, and they're wandering around trying to reconnect to that. But that's all that has taken over there. You'll remember having the jersey, but it won't come with you.
Well, I remember my aunt and I would have conversations about spirituality, and one of the things that she had mentioned, and I believe this firmly, but I don't remember the orientation, so please forgive me for that. I believe that we come back to fix the mistakes we made in past lives.
Exactly.
And until you ascend, I think the number that she had mentioned was 14, if I remember correctly. And on the 14th, you should be elevated. That's depending if you learn from your past experiences. So I think that when I'm going to say thank you again, Pat Rice, for everything, because I could go on here. I was talking to Pat right before the interview, and I'm going to say this as we end. And obviously, the attention span of human beings are about 30 minutes to about an hour. We got about an hour. I don't want to lose everyone. Give a little cliffhanger so people come back for season 5. So I want to say thank you, Pat.
Well, thank you for the privilege of your company. And I thoroughly enjoyed this. And again, stay curious. For anybody that's listening, just stay curious, stay open to this, because you'll be led where you're supposed to go if you just stay open and keep your heart and your mind open. And your guides will find you if you sit in the right place and be open to it.
Could not have said it better myself. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you so much, Steve. Pleasure.
Well, that's it for episode 51. Again, Pat Rice, thank you. I hope everyone enjoyed listening to it again. Pat's an amazing guest. I have had him on season 3, season 4. He's going to be on season 5. And I think we could talk for 10 hours and we'd still probably have stuff to talk about, because Pat is just an entertaining and very candid guest, and someone I truly enjoy talking to. But episode 52 is going to be my favorite episode. And it was interesting because I had like 4 of them that I really, really enjoyed throughout this season. But I decided to go with one that was, to me, very interesting because it was so candid, it was so honest, it was so personal for both of us, and we had a lot of things in common. And I think Morgan Beard was a great guest on so many levels, and someone who listens to the episodes frequently has told me that she felt that this was the best episode we've had so far. So maybe it's my favorite because of that, but it's also because it was so good to talk to Morgan Beard, and that will be episode 52. Please like, subscribe, or follow this podcast on your favorite platform. A glowing review is always helpful. And as a reminder, this podcast is for information, educational, and entertainment purposes. If you are struggling with a mental health or substance abuse issue, please reach out to a professional counselor or therapist for consultation.